Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai haere mai ki te kōrero nui I te ata, ko Jacquie taku ingoa, he inoi tātou. Kia tau. Kaore. Great start. Ka inoi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tunga. Kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei, Māori ora. Kia ora everyone, and welcome to our session this morning on the pursuit of Hauora, the value of Māori lives. I'm your chair this morning, and you won't hear very much from me, hopefully, because we've got some fantastic panelists. So we have, I'm not going to do big introductions, but we have Matua Rawiri Jansen, Matua Peter Crampton, and Lady Tureiti Moxon, and I'm so very excited to host this for you all. So I'm going to hand over to, no, we're going to do some housekeeping. I was going to say I'm going to hand over to Johnny, but Johnny's in the background and he's going to show us some slides. Here we go. Community code that I'm sure people are really familiar with. We have a moderator behind the scenes. In fact, we have two moderators behind the scenes, making sure that this is a safe space. And we do encourage you to be provocative in your interactions and your questions for us. We want this to be a really interesting conversation. But yeah, respect and space. Thanks, Johnny. And I'll close off the chat so I don't get distracted. And we will start with each panelist doing their own introduction. I was saying to them earlier, I can't possibly introduce people who wear so many hats in so many different environments and are passionate about so many different aspects of the kaupapa. So I'm going to hand it over to Lady Tureiti to start with, followed by Rawiri, followed by Peter, to start as they see fit, and then we'll see how the conversation develops. Kia ora, Lady Tureiti.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou katoa, ka nui te mihi atu kia koutou E tēnei wā. Ko Tureiti Moxon tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Paha, wera Ngāti Kahununu me Kaitahu ahau. Ko te tiamana o te National Hauora Coalition, me te tumuaki o te kōhao. No reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou. He mihi nui ki ngā kaiwhakariki mō tēnei kōrero, me aku hoa Rawiri Jansen tōku ingoa. I work as a primary care physician, mostly in Auckland, but I'm also Chief Clinical Officer for the Tūwharetoa Iwi Māori Partnership Board and some other hats that are not that interesting. I'm real privileged to be here with Professor Peter Crampton and Lady Tureiti Moxon, both of whom I think are really renowned for their consistent challenging the system to be better and reminding repeatedly about the obligations under the treaty. So really great to be here. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora tātou. Nōku te whiwhi ki te whaiwahi I tēnei whakawhiti kōrero, ko wai au. No ingarangi mei airana o ki tupuna I whānau mai au I ingarangi, I te paki au I ingarangi mei whakatū, no reira he pākia ahau. He te o tākau whakaihu waka ahau e mahi ana. Ko Peter Crampton tōku ingoa, no reira tēnā koutou. Greetings everybody. My daytime job is to work as an academic at the University of Otago. I work in a small academic unit called Kohatu Centre for Hauora Māori. My disciplinary base is public health, and I do my public health academic work in the context of Hauora Māori. I started my professional life as a GP in Cannons Creek in Porirua a long time ago, and I spent the balance of my career largely in the academic public health space, working on issues to do with health policy, resource allocation, social epidemiology, and related matters. And it's a real privilege for me to be here today with Lady Tureiti and with Rawiri, highly respected colleagues. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Shall we do the reverse order, or if there anything that you want to say to kind of start the session? So start with you, Peter, and then go to Rawiri, and then finish with Lady Tureiti.
Okay. Well, I would like to start by framing the discussion from my point of view. It's a discussion about Māori health and well-being and equity. And that leads me to think about the causes of the causes and root causes. For me, this is not primarily a discussion about the health system. It's a discussion about the way we conduct ourselves as a society. And this is the most important point from my point of view. And I'll get to the nub of that in just a moment. If we think about what drives Māori health inequities, I think our thoughts turn to structures of opportunity and social institutions, both of which are set up in ways which are racist, and resulting from the above is poverty, lack of access to opportunities, at least equity of access, and of course flowing out of that comes a racist healthcare system as well. Now, these are big social and political and economic issues, and each requires a set of responses all of its own. However, just to say that the racist structures of opportunity and our racist social institutions, which are a product of a colonial process, mean that the fundamental building blocks for health are not achieved in our society. And that has always been the case post-colonisation. And there are many recent and very contemporary examples of that, which we've all witnessed over the last year or two or three. But of course, they stretch back, right back to the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Second point I want to make is that poverty is a consequence of those big factors which drive health inequities, but poverty is not the whole story. And at the risk of oversimplifying this, I just want to make the point that if we think about the health gap between Māori and European, picking those two ethnic groupings specifically, let's just say, depending on the health outcome that we're talking about, half that gap, more or less, is accounted for by poverty. The other half of the gap is accounted for by, and I'm going to use the word racism here, but that encompasses all forms of racism, particularly institutional racism, and the way our institutions are structured. We all know that the negative attention, the inequitable access to structures of opportunity, et cetera, all get under the skin in ways which are very well known, very well described. The physiology and the endocrinology of that is absolutely clear, no question about that. And it has health damaging effects. And those health damaging effects are manifest and visible in so many ways and are reflected in statistics, which you're all familiar with. So I want to mention my last point here, and then I'm going to stop. But for me, This is a discussion about constitutional reform. That's where I go to when I'm thinking about how we get to the root causes here. And my caveat here is this is not my area of expertise. I'm not a constitutional expert. I'm not a lawyer. I don't speak to this matter with any huge insight, but I'm absolutely convinced that in order to achieve equity of health outcomes, we need to structure our entire society differently. And I go back to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I think about Moana Jackson's writings on this. I think about Ranganui Walker. I think about He Purpua, a much more contemporary document. Mataki Mai. Right. And if we get that part of it right, the kāwanatanga sphere of influence, the tino rangatiratanga sphere of influence, out of that flows social institutions which are fit for purpose, which are not biased and racist in the way they're structured, in the way they operate. That Māori leadership is properly exercised at all levels in the system, including within the health system. And out of that will flow equity of health outcomes and well-being. So I think our conversation will inevitably turn to aspects of the healthcare system, as it should. But that was the point I wanted to start with. I wanted to go back to root causes and think about how we get this right for ourselves in the future. So kia ora tātou, looking forward to our discussion together.
Kia ora, Peter. Deadly. Thank you. So today's conversation is about this really deceptively intriguing, simple question. What is the value of Māori lives within Aotearoa's health system? And Peter's lifting us up and saying, not just in the health system, let's answer that in a bigger sense in terms of society. But when we honestly look at the data and the lived experience for Māori, we see things that are deeply troubling. Māori die younger, have more years of life with ill health. We experience more barriers to care and receive fewer health resources relative to need. And those descriptors are not accidental. They reflect choices that have been made in policy and in funding and governance and design, and that's on us. We've got work to do. And so if we think about the provocation that Peter's giving us, I go straight to in the justice system, Māori are more likely to be spoken to by the police, and if spoken to by the police, more likely to be charged, and if charged, more likely to be charged with a serious crime, and if in court, more likely to be found guilty, and if found guilty, more likely to get a custodial sentence, like this crescendo of more likely to, this racist activity. That's true in the health system. We're less likely to get access to the system. We're less likely to get medicines. We're less likely to get investigations. We're less likely to get the full extent of our time in primary care. These factors contribute to the outcomes that we're facing. And the decisions which are made in our system, and I agree, I think we've got to do much better. And in doing better, we actually have to unpack how the system works and how it's created, and it's going to end up in constitutional. Some of my best friends are lawyers, the work that we've got to do as a nation is about understanding what that means to be Te Tiriti compliant. And I think that's important in terms of the institutions that all of us work in primary care settings and secondary care settings, right across all the social service settings, in education, in corrections, all of that. That's the work that we've got to do. And it can be done. What does a Tiriti compliance system looks like? It's going to have, Māori experience of it will be that our mana's intact, our whānau are strong, we're connected to our whenua and to our culture, and we've got the ability to live flourishing lives. Let's be clear, Māori authority is normal, Māori governance is normal, Māori leadership is normal and required, and equity is expected. Equity is an entitlement in the system that we are imagining. And hauora will be something that's a birthright for our moko. So, yeah, back at you, Pete. Thanks. Over to you, Lady Tureiti.
Well, kia ora koe Martina. Well, that's pretty much set the scene for everything. So that's absolutely fantastic. So I just wanted to make the point, really, that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is the founding document of our nation of Aotearoa, and it should be honoured as such. And it's not a take it or leave it option that's often portrayed by the synthesis of governments. It is a covenant between Māori and the Crown, and all of us today are protected by that covenant. But I also want to say that the health system is basically broken. And what we do is we try to patch it up the best we can, and every successive government has a brand new idea, and they want to put that idea out and make it so that we all think that it's something new and that's going to save us all, but in fact it doesn't. So I just wanted to just take you on a little journey of some of the things that we have been fighting for quite a long time, since 2005 in actual fact, since the Y1315 claim to the Waitangi Tribunal in relation to the underfunding and under-resourcing of PHOs, which, you know, that was an amazing time because PHOs were meant to be community-focused, community-led and community-driven. And at that time, when we went before the Waitangi Tribunal, we advocated, and that's the claimants, advocated for the establishment of a DHB at the time, a Māori DHB. And in 2018, the three of us actually were finally heard before the Waitangi Tribunal. We all the three of us gave evidence before that the Waitangi Tribunal at Tūrangawaiwai in Ngaruawahia. And that accumulated in the 2575 Y claim, Hauora, and the Hauora report in 2019. And that's the things that Rawiri talks about, you know, the tribunal found that, you know, we have the poorest health status, it's been said, of any ethnic group in the country. We're twice as likely to die of preventable diseases. We're twice as likely to face discrimination in health, and we're less likely to be referred for diagnostic tests. So, and the Waitangi Tribunal did recommend the establishment of a Māori Health Authority. So this report was followed by the Health and Disability Systems Review. Now, some of you may remember that. That was led by Heather Simpson and co. In 2020, and they recommended the establishment of an independent Māori Health Authority to lead Hauora Māori. And it was to be underpinned by Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And in 2022, Te Whaiora was finally established under a Labour government. And this was the first time in the history of our country that this was ever done. And we were able to participate in a health system that was Māori-focused, Māori-led, and Māori-driven. And we had decision-making powers to look after ourselves in our own way, to co-design our health system the way we wanted and the way we believed that our communities needed. And so on and we go. And then, of course, as many of you, as we all know, Te Whaiora was disestablished 2 years later under this coalition government. In that same year, I just wanted you to note that Janice Cooker from Matapuna Oranga, PHO in Tauranga Moana, and Te Koho took an urgent claim, and that was Y3307 to the Waitangi Tribunal and the disestablishment of Te Aka Whaiora. And the Waitangi Tribunal recommended that the government should commit to revisiting an option of a standalone Māori Health Authority. So in 2025, 4 Māori providers, Te Puna Oranga o Mātātua, Papakura Marae, Ngāti Hine Health Trust, and Te Kōhau Health, took a case before the High Court, and in relation to the disestablishment of Te Aka Whaiora. We're still awaiting that decision to come through. And then so in 2025, we took a complaint to the UN, to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in our country, because a lot of what we are experiencing aren't new things necessarily, but they're more blatant today than they've ever been in terms of racism and what that looks like and what that means. And so from my perspective, it was important that the UN hear our concerns that were happening here in terms of the disestablishment of Te Aka Whaiora, the removal of all references to Te Tiriti or Waitangi in legislation, the removal of Section 7AA, in particular in the Oranga Tamariki Act, the changes to the Paiora Act that have been enacted, and the removal and basically the changes that they've made to Article 2 in terms of the takutaimon. So on it goes, and it never stops. And from my perspective, as Moana Jackson said, you cannot build a just system on a system that is built on injustice. So I'll leave it there. Kia ora koutou katoa.
You're on mute, Jacquie.
My turn. Everybody's had a turn so far. Thank you so much for those three really important kōrero, and I think there's so much that's come out of it. It's making my head spin just slightly, but we have had a question from Joe Rama in the chat, who is really concerned about mental health, particularly perinatal mental health, and she has a question: how do we get more support for perinatal suicide prevention? And I think that ties in, just to kind of broaden it out a little bit, because we've started with the big picture stuff. I think there's a deeper question in there around rangatiratanga and being and resource management and all of those kind of bigger questions. So I'm really interested in, has anybody got a take on that?
I'll have a crack, because kia ora, Joe, and love your work. And the same question will be true across huge parts of our system. How is it that we're figuring out where to design, deliver, and resource solutions? Because right now, I think we've got a racist system which is not doing what we need it to do. And so perinatal mental health might also be alcohol and drug. It might also be chronic renal failure and trying to prevent dialysis, and I can go on and on and on, and I'm sure many people in the audience, and shout out, there's 130 people with us this morning, so all of you who have joined us, thanks for joining. But Joe's right in being able to say that there's many places where we need to advocate for more funding and more resource and more support, and sometimes more system permissions and sometimes more authorities. And so I'm kind of, in my head, I'm going, the standard ordinary techniques that we have available to us in protest include things like occupation, right? And so sometimes occupation is Aotearoa Square and let's occupy and let's block a road. Sometimes occupation is stay in place. You guys are doing some amazing work. Do not give up easily. Stay in place. Occupy the roles that you have. And so that's one of the things we can do. Advocacy is another thing that we ought to do. And so Tureiti's advocating out there into sort of United Nations territories. And I think all of us celebrate that, and that's really important. That's hard work, but it's important work. And each of us will also be advocating in, sort of district funding and having to put forward business cases and all that sort of shit. But I'm saying I think we need to do all of that and we need to keep going. And then one of the other things that's obvious is that we actually need to work together. And so, today is a place, this is a conversation where we can share ideas across, we can support each other in doing this work. But that's my first response. Others?
Well, kia ora. We have a program, or not a program, a service called Kahutaurima, and that's working with our women, our whānau, with babies prior to being born, and working with them right up until the age of 5. And I think that what we need to be looking at more is to be working in the prevention space. And I think that that's probably the best way in which we can go. But in the end, sometimes we just got to do it ourselves. And waiting for the government to put their money where it ought to go can be a long, long wait. And so we just have to find ways and be very, very innovative in how we do that and how we use funding and the funding that we do get. So kia kaha koutou, kia kaha tātou.
Kia ora. Can I just come in here and build on those comments, thinking specifically about resource allocation? And this is only part of the story, but we have a system which declares itself as being committed to meeting need, and to be underpinned by a system of needs-based resource allocation, so funding going to where it's most needed. That is not especially debated as a principle. It's how it's applied that is problematic. And mental health is a wonderful example, because there is so much need, and a lot of that need is not properly catered for within our healthcare system, and that need is growing. As an example of how the system fails to work properly, back in the year 2001, we implemented a new form of resource allocation in primary healthcare called the capitation funding formula for PHOs and general practices. And that formula was pretty revolutionary for the time, but very quickly became outdated. It was very rudimentary by necessity, because it didn't have the data to work on, but very rapidly those data became available. And nothing was done for a very long time. And there were many, many calls for updating the funding formula for general practices, the capitation funding formula. Much more recently, Saperi Research Group were contracted by Te Ora Health New Zealand to update the formula. And they did, in my view, a fine piece of work, the best that has ever been done on that formula. Now, it's not a silver bullet. It won't answer all problems, but it was a fine piece of work. And I'll have insight into that because I sat on the expert group overseeing that work. And a voluminous report went to the government on restructuring that formula. Full of data, full of evidence, full of the working, full of statistics, and made a compelling case for a more sophisticated funding formula for general practices, which included weighting factors for the usual things: population size, age, sex, also ethnicity, also socioeconomic deprivation, and also multimorbidity. And sorry to get a bit technical here, but it was a fine piece of work, and was backed up by evidence the likes of which we've not seen before. Now, back in 2024, I think it was September, someone can correct me, the current government released a cabinet circular saying ethnicity would not be used as a targeting mechanism or weighting mechanism unless it was fully justified. So it was feeding into the race versus need, inverted commas there, please, debate. The Minister received the Sapere report via Te Hauora, Health New Zealand, highly evidence-based, with a formula which had both socioeconomic deprivation and ethnicity in it, amongst other things. The Minister made the unilateral decision, the Minister of Health, that is, that ethnicity would be extracted from that formula, despite the mountain of evidence that was provided in support of ethnicity being there. And that evidence is statistical. No one debates the evidence. There has been no debate or challenge about that evidence. It was simply unacceptable for reasons that can only be political, for ethnicity to be in a needs-based funding formula. And hence the formula is weaker than it should be. And it's an example of how resources do not get directed to areas of highest need, and perinatal mental health problems is just one example, as Rawiri said. To my mind, it's unacceptable that advice from Te Hauora and Sapere research group was not followed. It means that we have a weaker formula, and it means that it's failing to be needs-based in the way that it should be. I provide that as an example to illuminate the sort of processes that occur at all levels, but in this case at the political level, which diminish the effectiveness of our system and its ability to meet the needs of people who have high needs. Kia ora.
Small silence while I wait to see if anybody wants to pick that up and advance it. I don't know. Does anybody else feel like it's just absolutely huge? And it is. And I guess while you were talking, Peter, my brain was going to the paper that we had Nina Scott, Rawiri, and I were authors on about the bowel cancer advocacy process that we went through to try and get the bowel cancer screening age lowered to the appropriate level to try and work towards equity. And despite modelling evidence, significant evidence over the years, it was just like, that's just not important to us. We have a different way of assessing need, and it has nothing to do with evidence. So yeah, my brain went there. So we have a question that's going to be a complete pivot from Heather. Hi, Heather. Asking specifically about STIR, but I kind of want to broaden it out a little bit because we have a lot of allies in the room and we have a lot of Māori in the room. So thoughts about what we can maybe activate or do in the next 3 or 4 years from a Hauora Moai Māori Cancer leadership perspective. We've been having conversations about what can we activate in the election? How can we start a meaningful conversation that gets picked up nationally, but also what's our kind of longer term plan? What can advocates do in this space? What can Māori organisations do in this space? And I also want to acknowledge Jo, who asked the earlier question, asked the question that started all this, talking about actually she'd like to go and be an Uber driver right now. Sorry, I made a huge assumption about the she because of the perinatal mental health thing. They, looking to be an Uber driver, absolutely burnt out, had enough, because it is really huge. So having said that in multiple different ways, sorry, can the panelists make any sense of both what I said and the question that came from Heather? What can we do?
Well, can I just chip in with a thought? It's just one thought here. That's a very, very big question. And I think the comment's already been made that all of us are in this for the long haul. In my view, our public health system, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment, is under some threat. And what we can do as in our professional roles, but also as citizens, as members of the public, and as people who exercise our political voice in a whole variety of ways, we can advocate for and state our uncompromising commitment to a public health system. And by public health system, I mean a system which is in the control of the public as opposed to being privatized. That's the distinction I'm drawing there. I'm not suggesting that we need a monolithic public health system with public ownership of everything. I'm not suggesting that at all, because I believe in Māori ownership and other forms of ownership in the health system. And we may want to have Jacquie, a conversation this morning about different forms of ownership, because it's an important set of issues there. But what I'm saying is, if we place ownership and control of key health services in the hands of particularly overseas equity-owned corporates, then we're giving up the fight. We've lost it. We will have a health system which is on a trajectory towards massively increasing inequity. So stating our commitment and voting accordingly to a public health system, a publicly controlled, a health system which is under our control as citizens, seems to me to be a very, very important component of our response to that very, very important question. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Peter. Rawiri, you look like you're ready to lean forward.
Yeah. So, yeah, election year, and I think that's it's a time to be active, and it's really interesting. Like, I'm getting old now, right? But I can remember being protesting about Te Tiriti back in the 80s and 90s, and then I want to compare that to what we've seen in the last couple of years, and it's fantastic. It's really incredible, and people get organised and they get connected, and we get busy. And so I want to suggest that that's part of what we need to do. I want to talk about ngā kaitiaki Hauora or Aotearoa. So if somebody can type that link, if you Google it and then type the link into the chat for everybody to be able to see. And it's a response exactly to what Peter's saying. So it's got, it says that we need to be together to protect our public health system. And it's got three sort of foundational po, and one is adequate sustained funding for the health system, and I think that goes to the provocation we got from Joe. Protecting and strengthening the public healthcare system, so we need to be very cautious and very worried about privatisation, as Peter said, and honouring Te Tiriti. And so I think that means really clearly the tino rangatiratanga, the equity, the partnership. So as Peter's alluding to, having a public health system in Aotearoa, New Zealand, will have certain characteristics where iwi owns stuff. And that's the kind of work that Tureiti's led in Kirikiriroa for decades. And what we can see is that when Māori are enabled, when Māori are actively owning and delivering services and designing services, we get great results. And so, you know, let's work together. So I recommend everybody join Ngā Kaitiaki. Well, you can't join individually. It's a beautiful thing. If you want to be part of Ngā Kaitiaki Hauora, you need to bring your organisation along to that party. Yeah, but you know, it's election year. Let's get busy. Let's really influence this. And I'm not promoting one political party. I think what we've got to do is have a conversation, a national conversation that's kind of, it's got some constitutional provocation behind it, but it's got a really clear focus on what it means to have a health system that works for us, and it's got to be owned in this country. Absolutely.
I would go for the party that reestablishes Te Aka Whaiora for a start. That's number one. Number two, I believe in voting for myself, wherever that is and whoever that is, and whether it's, you know, I do advocate for a party, and that party represents who I look like, who I am, and what I stand for. And so You know, as much as we hope and we pray that others are going to look after us and do the things that we need them to do, in the end, it's going to be up to us to do it for ourselves. And that's what rangatiratanga is all about. That's what Māori mana motuhake is all about. If we're going to, if those barriers are going to continue, we have a big constitutional hearing coming up in terms of the Waitangi Tribunal. We should be thinking about those things. In actual fact, in my view, is we should be hitting these things at every single opportunity. And I just want to pick up on the point that was made about bowel cancer. You know, we took a complaint to the human rights on that, and on the bowel cancer, you know, extension of age, we were given the opportunity to go in for a mediation with the Crown. The Crown came back and said no. And that was the end of that story. So you see, as much as we want everybody else to answer the things that concern us most, it doesn't actually happen. So the thing for us is we have to do it for ourselves. We have to look for those answers ourselves and those resolutions ourselves. And let me tell you this, the government and successive governments do not have answers for us. We kei a tātou anō te aratika, you know, the answers lie within ourselves.
Tureiti, can I ask you about the, you know, let's have Te Aka Whaiora again, because in my heart I'm going, ouch. It was like, you know, there was a really solid piece of work, and you kind of mentioned some of it, that we got, here's the recommendation to establish an independent Māori health authority, and the Labour government did consultation and stood it up, and there it was. And I think we did some fabulous work. I mean, I went, fuck, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity and I'm all in. I went into it. We got knocked over. We got disestablished. We got battered by this new government under urgency, with no consultation, with none of that. And I mean, to my knowledge, I'm the only one who said, fuck off, I resign. I'm not going to be shifted over to Te Whatuora. I did not come and work for Te Whatuora. I came because it's an independent Māori health authority. That's the kaupapa, I'm all in. And so they lifted and shifted everybody else. And I've seen all of my colleagues now inside Whatuora. They've been restructured 3-4 times in the last, you know, sort of 2 years, so that whatever was Te Aka Whaiora now under the Te Whatuora regime has been deeply, deeply challenged and traumatised and changed. And I go, I don't think we need to stand it up again if it's going to get knocked over. There's some conditions we've got to have if we're going to have a Māori health authority. You know, that, in my head that is. And so I guess I want to ask you, what do you think the conditions are? Because I don't want to see us stood up and knocked over and stood up and knocked over.
Well, I think you know, our history shows that we've been stood up and knocked over, stood up and knocked over. It shows that, but we can't stop, right? We can't stop. We can't stop fighting for the things that we believe are right for ourselves, and are right. You know, we talk about equities, we talk about ethnicity, we talk about these things. They pull these things out, they redefine, and this is governments. Redefine things so it makes it look better on their side, when in actual fact it's a mess. And so unless we keep saying we want this to change, the Constitution may help. Who knows? They don't even recognise the Tiriti o Waitangi. This government doesn't even recognise the Treaty of Waitangi, although they told the UN that they do. Oh man. Anyway. The thing for me is we can't stop fighting for what we believe is tika and pono for us. And if we keep being, we will be battered around. We've had 50 years of hard slog labour put into the changes that have been made towards advancement of Māori development and health. And look, by the stroke of a pen, by urgency or through urgency, it's gone. So it's not going to stop. You know, get another government, they'll change it around, and then there's, you know, we get some wins, we get some losses. You know, that's the way that it bats. But unless we change the system the way that it is, and we keep fighting to change that system, it's going to stay the same. And because at the base of all of this is power and control. And the rangatiratanga is not controlled by a government. The rangatiratanga is controlled by us, the people. And that's the key from my perspective of where we need to go. And that I want that for Oranga Tamariki as well. I want us to be able to look after our children, and for this government and successive governments to stop stealing our children. And then we need to be saying these things, and we need to be saying them loudly, and we need to be saying them at every single forum we can. We have the answers. We have the resolutions. And, you know, it was one of the most exciting times of our lives, wasn't it? When we were setting up and getting that thing like moving, you know, and then it came to fruition, and we had it for 2 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, even ourselves, even some of our own people weren't satisfied with the gains that were made. But, you know, that's the way it goes, right? But we mustn't stop. And it's the same thing as all the issues that we are all faced with, poverty being one of the biggest issues of all, and we still haven't resolved that. So if we can focus on these things and make these things, take it in hand and change these things ourselves, I think we'll see a better outcome for all of us.
Yeah, kia ora, Tureiti. Part of me was also kind of provoking you to go, kahunganu, because you're kahunganu.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to go, no, we're going to have our own Māori Health Authority. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And so I just suspect that's going to be part of the future in terms of that. The tino rangatiratanga will be our tribal nations wanting a particular description of what that future is. And I guess the other part I thought was actually we've got to get a treaty settlement. So our Hauora claims, you know, as you say, that all of us have been involved in it, that Hauora claim needs to be settled because last year in High Court, there was that really amazing finding from the appeal court that said treaty settlements are enduring, you know, and so I kind of want us to get into that space because if we can get a treaty settlement, then we're not going to get stood up, knocked over, kind of that bullshit which has been going on forever. But yeah, I totally agree with you. You know, we've got to keep going. We absolutely must keep going. You know, ake tonu, right?
Ake toru atu.
Kia ora, can I just add two thoughts to that wonderful exchange of views? The first thought is that I'd like to propose that the underlying trajectory here of New Zealand society and Māori, well, tino rangatiratanga, is a positive one. I think I'm proposing that as the thought. Like Te Hauora wouldn't have been set up 20 years ago. It was set up recently, and I know it was knocked over. But it did exist. And I think that, I agree with the view that we have to keeping on because of the underlying positive trajectory, driven partly by demographics. I know I've got a very biased view of the world because I work in a university, but I see a generation of people, of young people, they're different and their sensibilities are different. And they don't have brain explosions over a Māori-run organisation. They just shrug and say, yep, all good, that's normal. They don't react in that intensely negative way that my demographic does, or some parts of my demographic, I should say, because it's not all by any means. The other thought is I think there's a much, much bigger internationally driven fight, and it's sort of like a fight to the death. And I'm going to introduce the concept of neoliberalism here, and I think that's the ideology we're up against. Indigenous rights and tino rangatiratanga stand in the way of neoliberalism, of corporates. And we have political parties in New Zealand which channel the needs of corporates right into the very heart of decision-making in our country. And one of the reasons that Indigenous rights are being so thoroughly crushed and denigrated and marginalized is because the extractive, exploitative nature of international corporates won't tolerate Indigenous rights, can't. They get in the way. So just two thoughts to add to that conversation, but essentially a positive view of the trajectory of New Zealand society, so long as we don't go down that blind alley of meeting the needs, serving the needs of neoliberal corporates.
Yeah, tautoko. It's really important, as we go through this, and this is challenging, hard work, but we've got to be really dedicated to it, is to hold and believe in what we're doing. You know, like for me, the most positive Māori health statistic there is that we are, as a population, growing. There's 1 million Māori. You know, we're a nation of 1 million. You know, that's awesome. Our future is just unimpeachably going to be fabulous, and our young people are fabulous. And yeah, we've got a lot of work to do, but let's be really positive about it. You're absolutely right. Thanks, Peter. I agree.
I'm just going to jump in here and go, we've just about cleared the hour. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Are there any kind of closing thought, literally a couple of minutes, any closing thoughts from the panelists? And I also want to acknowledge all the people who put questions, really thoughtful questions in there, and we haven't gotten to them. I'm hoping the kōrero has gone some way to answering them anyway, but Rawiri, any final thoughts?
So in summary, I want us to be really positive about the future. To achieve that future, we've got to be really determined and deliberate and dedicated and relentless. And so it's been really fabulous to spend this hour this morning with, you know, there's 160 people on this morning. Beautiful. Thank you all so much for being part of this. And we've got more to do. So if I can recommend to you, ngā kaitiaki Hauora, or Aotearoa, you know, get involved. If you can support some of the struggles that we've got going in terms of Māori providers, in terms of challenges in court or challenges in the tribunal, please be part of this work. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Rawiri. Peter.
Kia ora. Yeah, just a big mihi to all of those people out there listening to this. Thank you for joining. 3 points from me. Just to highlight again the obvious point, the central importance of Te Tiriti, Waitangi and tino rangatiratanga. Without that, we're not going very far or very fast. And in order to achieve that, we need constitutional reform and a strengthening of our democracy and our democratic systems and structures. And if we bring that into the health system, that means that Māori leadership is of central importance in health service planning, ownership, provision, etc. Kia ora tātou.
I just want to leave you with a thought. Last year, in the last financial year, 17 of my staff here at Te Kōhau Health went into home ownership. So 17 of my staff this year, at the end, well, almost at the end of this month, another 17 are entering into or have entered into home ownership in this financial year. Home ownership is the key, in my view, of health, a great health outcome. And as much as we think that what we do and how we do it doesn't mean a lot, by planting one seed and giving people the vision that they can do it, and then they see their friends do it, what we create is the domino effect. And that's what we can do if we all decide that we want a better and different Aotearoa. So, kia ora koutou katoa.
What an awesome way to end. So I have the privilege of thanking our panelists. It has been an amazing kōrero, and I think we could probably have gone on for a few more hours. And I see also want to thank the people in the comments, the people who've come and just sat quietly and listened, but the people in the comments who've been so enthusiastic. I want to acknowledge also the kōrero happening in the comments about burnout and how exhausted and disheartened people are in this current kind of environment, and the standing up and knocking over. Rawiri, ngā mihi for actually stepping out of that process and declining to be a part of it. I'm watching so many of my colleagues get restructured left, right and centre, but still with no security. So it's not like they get restructured whether this is how you can, you know, stay here. It's a mess. So hoping that everybody found this as invigorating and exciting as I did, and thank you so much. So what's going to happen now is we go to some slides that will thank our partners. We have some amazing partners who've made this possible. We have representatives of a lot of those partners are sitting in the chat and taking part in things. There's a call for action. There's all sorts of, like, I have to stop looking at it. It's really distracting. So I just want to thank you all very much. I'll close with a karakia and we'll all go on about our hopefully super exciting days. Ka inoi tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa. Te ata whai o tō tātou ari ki a ihu karaiti. Me te aroha te atua, me te whiwhina takitanga. Ki te wairua tātou. Ake, ake, ake. Amen. Ka kite.